The Ukraine war revealed how we were being misled about the actual events, the fact that Ukraine was losing. Many people are uncertain about what to believe regarding the current situation in the Middle East. Let's start by zooming out and setting the scene. Colonel, are we on the brink of another world war? And what does that imply? What significance does this conflict hold, considering all the issues the U.S. faces at home? I guess you're saving the easy questions for last. I don't think we're on the brink of a world war, but of course, I could be wrong. That has happened once or twice in my life. I believe what we're dealing with currently is the potential for a localized issue to escalate regionally. The problem is that we have two irreconcilable sides. Progress is unlikely with Mr. Netanyahu and his government, or with Hamas and its supporters. The best hope, in the short run, is some form of ceasefire that allows breathing space. However, neither Mr. Netanyahu nor Hamas have shown any willingness to ease up. Why are we considering a regional war? This situation differs greatly from the conditions of 1973, which marked Israel's last major war. They've had sporadic fighting in southern Lebanon in '82 and subsequently, but not a major conflict like the '73 war. However, this has the potential to escalate in that direction, given the changes in the region. Not only is the region more capable now, but there are also new technologies involved, and we now have Iran and especially Turkey positioned on the sidelines. Both could potentially enter this conflict, leading to severe consequences for Israel and the U.S. I believe what the Biden administration aims for, albeit late, is to contain the conflict. Unfortunately, their diplomacy has failed significantly. Wherever Blinken has intervened, things have worsened. The situation is quite serious now, and there's a lack of leadership in the White House. Historically, when there was a fear of Israel or its opponents going too far, we had a president who personally intervened and set limits. However, we lack such leadership now. The Israelis essentially have a blank check from President Biden, similar to what the German emperor gave to the Emperor of Austria-Hungary in 1914, a serious mistake then, and what we fear now. Things could rapidly spiral out of control. Colonel, what are your thoughts on the emotions running high on both sides, with people seeking retribution for the civilians killed? I know you've discussed the concept of collective punishment and how it breeds new enemies. What should people understand? Well, there's plenty of blame on each side for the current tragedy if we delve into history. But let's revisit the Camp David Accords. During discussions between Menachem Begin, then Prime Minister of Israel, and President Sadat of Egypt, Begin offered Gaza's control to Egypt, suggesting they take charge of it, stating it was a tinderbox, a catalyst for conflict. However, President Sadat declined vehemently. Why? For two reasons. Firstly, his society was fragile, and admitting millions more people might destabilize it, a sentiment not uncommon in the Arab world, observable in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Jordan, and more. Secondly, it would weaken the argument for a Palestinian state, which has been in the interest of the Arab nations in the region to sustain as a means to contain and weaken Israel. This underlines the background of the conflict. Living conditions in Gaza have been far from ideal. It's often referred to as the largest open-air prison or concentration camp globally, a grim but partially accurate description. Another aspect people overlook is that many Arab Christians reside in Gaza, mainly Orthodox and Roman Catholic. They, too, have become targets and casualties, not affiliated with Hamas but still suffering due to Israel's determined efforts to eliminate Hamas. If civilians don't evacuate, they face the same fate as Hamas. This brings us back to the current state of affairs. We're not taking action to halt this. Mr. Netanyahu holds more control over his and our destinies than we do. This has never been the case before. Previously, the President of the United States held more power. However, Israel's influence over American politics and on Capitol Hill has shifted the balance. They now hold the trump cards, not the president. I don't anticipate any change until Mr. Netanyahu decides he's finished, which could pave the way for the regional war we're discussing. Now, it's time for a quick break to hear messages from my partners. First up, Bitcoin Conference 2024, the world's largest Bitcoin event, coming to Nashville next year. Join us for 3 full days of notes, panels, networking events, workshops, concerts, and more. My first ever Bitcoin conference was back in 2021, where I launched my initial episodes of Coin Stories. I didn't expect this to become my full-time job. I was just hoping to meet Bitcoiners and find more guests for the show. Anything can happen here, especially if you dream of working in the industry. Ticket prices go up every month until the big event, so don't miss out. To get your tickets early and for a 10% discount, use the code HODL, HODL at b.tc/conference. See you in Nashville. Next up, Fold. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase, from Amazon to groceries, even your Bitcoin conference ticket, with Fold's Bitcoin Cashback debit card. Plus, you can play to win free Satoshis or even a whole Bitcoin by spinning the rewards wheel. This app is excellent for someone new to Bitcoin, way better than earning reward miles and points. Head to foldapp.com/Natalie. If you use my link, you'll get 10,000 sats when you sign up for Spin or Spin Plus and spend at least $20 on the cart. All right, back to the show. Well, America certainly isn't the superpower it was once known for, and I want to turn to our global economic status. I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes from John Quincy Adams: "Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will her heart, her benediction, and her prayers be. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy." I believe that great nations are built on strong economies, but they can destroy themselves pursuing the seduction of a foreign empire, and I think that's what's happened with the U.S. Our economy and prosperity once represented the powerful idea of the American dream. We were the beacon of hope around the world. That was truly our strength and national security. Can you share how our economic demise has contributed to what's happening globally? Well, let's remember that both George Washington and Alexander Hamilton said that America's mission in the world was to be an engine of economic prosperity. They believed that by building up our economy and demonstrating our success, others would want to emulate us. However, we discarded this notion during the Second World War, and in the 50 to 70 years since, we've become an imperial state. This expansion was in part due to the significant destruction during the war, leaving the Soviet Union as the principal winner in terms of territory, power, and influence. To fill the vacuum for Japan and Germany, we gradually established a global presence with 800 bases, and so on. Simultaneously, we hollowed out our economy by moving our manufacturing base overseas. The ruling elites sought profits by outsourcing to countries like China for cheap labor. Interestingly, China now faces economic challenges since cheap labor is scarce. Some corporations and bases have shifted from China to other parts of Southeast Asia. Concurrently, we've diminished our energy sector and high-tech manufacturing, which were once our strongholds. All of this was foolishly exported elsewhere, leaving us weaker economically. This was something Donald Trump aimed to reverse, but the current administration has exacerbated the situation. Now, let's look at the potential impact of the war. If Iran is dragged into this conflict, which I believe could happen due to the deployment of naval power in the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, certain consequences are likely. There's a possibility that the Straits of Hormuz will be closed. If Egypt aligns itself with other Arab states against Israel and the Turks enter the conflict, the Suez Canal might be affected. The implications for oil pipelines, offshore drilling, and exports from regions like Libya and Egypt would be catastrophic. Oil prices could surge to $200 a barrel or more, disrupting the global economy. This is also why I've invested in digital currency. However, let's avoid dwelling on that for now. Anyone looking at the global situation with a sober mind wouldn't want this war. The Chinese, for instance, are highly reliant on food, and a significant portion of their energy from Africa and the Middle East, transported via sea. A conflict in the area, involving the U.S. Navy, could severely impact China's supplies. They would prefer a negotiated settlement and have expressed concerns to Israel regarding their actions in the UN and public forums. But let's be honest, in an existential fight, rules hold little weight. Making it an existential fight for Israel makes it so for other nations in the region, leading to a complicated situation. We're witnessing numerous cracks, such as the potential impact on oil prices. America's status as the global reserve and its ability to print oil with the petrodollar is shifting. You mentioned my recent predictions, Biden's uncertain term completion, and a possible bank holiday, where access to accounts may be restricted. I advocate for Bitcoin as a technology for freedom, and it could serve as an escape hatch if fiat currency faces scrutiny. Many experts have highlighted the fragility of our banking system, evident in the critical weaknesses of the top 10 U.S. banks, some of the world's largest. Any significant issues with these banks could severely impact the world economy. We even had Jamie Dimon talking about the fragility of the system and the lurking dangers out there. You know, I can't predict when, how, or what. All I can do is look at triggers. My point is Ukraine was bad, but effectively, everyone lied to each other in the West and claimed it would be a big success. It's a total failure. That's vanishing from the screen right now. We're pouring money into it to maintain the facade that the Ukrainian state is viable and not a total failure. That's for political cover in Washington and Western capitals, but the war there is effectively over. The Russians are advancing. They will determine Ukraine's future, not us, and it's certainly not going to be in NATO or the EU, I suspect. So now we've shifted to the Middle East, a totally different arena, but I would argue the stakes there are higher, and the consequences for the global economy are far more grave. You know, the trigger is, quite frankly, if Iran and or the Turks become involved, and I think the longer this persists in the West, the more likely that is. Every conceivable scenario that crashes the global economy, and particularly our economy in the West, is very likely. The BRICS will probably survive this more easily. Russia is flourishing at this point, and in fact, in many respects, it would be in its interest to dump fiat currency entirely and go to the gold standard. We'll see what they do. You know, we still have Chinese shedding U.S. treasuries, but they haven't gone to the fire sale and essentially dumped everything. If we get a fire sale overseas from Saudi Arabia and China regarding U.S. treasuries, I think we're in a lot of trouble. Well, what is this bank holiday that you mentioned? Like, how would that actually play out? Well, I think you're referring to something where I said the banks could close for a couple of weeks. Or are you talking about the debt holiday I discussed? We could go into both. I thought that you mentioned that you thought that one day people wouldn't be able to access their accounts, and that is financial censorship we have seen in other countries, including Western countries like Canada, obviously Cyprus, and others. People literally can't access their own money that they think is in the bank. Can you touch on that? Well, remember during the Depression, we shut down the nation's banks for 2 weeks because the runs of banks threatened to destroy the whole system. I think we could see something similar, just as we shut down trading on Wall Street. You know, we can push a button and simply halt all trading to prevent another total crash. I think you could see something similar happen in the banking system. Again, what's the trigger for it, you know? I can't predict when the black swan will take flight, to put it bluntly, but I think James Rickards and others have all mentioned these kinds of things. Now when it comes to a debt holiday, this is something that I think deserved some attention a lot of time ago but never got it. In the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance, when everyone was burdened with debt that they could not possibly retire under any circumstances, the king, emperor, you know, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, or the king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, could simply say debt holiday. All debts are forgiven. In other words, the clock goes to zero, we start over. Well, the bankers are utterly opposed to that because it would ruin them, they would go out of business. And that brings us to digital currency. You know, when it becomes clear that the banks are not solvent, when it becomes clear that we have debt that is so large that it cannot be retired, then you begin to question how much your cash is worth. Now initially, I think we're going to see the dollar very strong, which is obviously not too good for our economy. It will persist that way, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe longer, and then suddenly, I think it'll tank. You know, again, these are prognostications based on previous history. If that happens, and I think it could, digital currency becomes an option, a better option as a store of wealth. Again, the banks hate this, want nothing to do with it, but they may not have much control. The whole central banking system has reached a point where it is corrupted by borrowing and toxic debt, and off-balance sheet debt means it's a mess. I wouldn't want to be in the Federal Reserve or on its board for anything in the world right now. It's time for another quick break to hear these messages from my partners. Next up, CoinKite. CoinKite offers everything you need to safely self-custody your Bitcoin. CoinKite produces the cold card wallet, which is the cold storage device I use for safekeeping my Bitcoin. You can verify the source code. It's ultra secure and easy to use, even if you're a beginner. Head to their site in my show notes to find all their custody products, cold cards in different colors, seed phrase plates, tap signers, block clocks, and more, and get a 5% discount using my link. Become your own bank with Bitcoin and CoinKite. Next up, Crowd Health, my alternative to fiat health insurance, which is just way too expensive. Think about it. You send that money every single month to a massive corporation, and you never see it again, even if you don't get sick. And if you do need a doc, sometimes you have to pay even more out of pocket. Luckily, there's another option, and it's all about community. Crowd Health brings together Bitcoiners who crowdfund each other's healthcare. So you no longer have to pay fiat health insurance companies. You get to help other Bitcoiners, and they help you in return. So how it works is when someone needs a doctor or hospital visit, Crowd Health negotiates down the medical bill lower than what insurance would be, and the community helps you fund the cost. You get to save the money you would have sent to insurance, and hey, why not put it into Bitcoin? I'm so glad I made the switch to be part of this community, and now I spend only about $100 a month on healthcare. Head to joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie for more information. I'm excited to share that I am now an advisor for the Orange Pill app. If you haven't downloaded it yet, then you're missing out on connecting to Bitcoiners in your area. The Orange Pill app is focused on building the social layer for Bitcoin and helping create opportunities for in-person connections and community building. You create a profile, and you'll see lots of familiar faces, and then you can search for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin events based on your location. I'm geotagged in my home base, St. Louis, and I'm so grateful I've been able to meet new Bitcoiners thanks to OPA. If you want to sign up, head to the referral link in my show notes. Well, this all goes to what you've been saying, that the U.S. really could be facing an existential crisis, all caused by our excessive spending and debt, the fact that we're bankrupt in so many places, the rule of law has been destroyed. Earlier, we mentioned the deteriorating military strength, all of these rising geopolitical risks. But again, touching back on what I said at the top, our country, our choice. You do have hope that we can bring people together and restore America to its economic greatness and prosperity. So who is going to rise to that occasion and defend our way of life? Well, first of all, I think Americans ought to get out of this business of looking for a messiah to rescue them. We're going to have to rescue ourselves. That means we're going to have more responsible people governing this country than the ones who are currently there. In 1932 and again in 1934, FDR effectively defaulted. What he did is that he said we have to restructure our debt and told our creditors that we would pay our debt, but we had to restructure the payments. The only way that we can do that, and the only way he was able to do it, well, he was able to do it for two reasons. First of all, an enormous amount of gold pouring into American banks from people that owed us money for the First World War. We don't have that advantage right now. The second advantage that he had is that he could stop spending money in certain key areas. We have to cut spending. Show me someone out there who's going to stand up and say, I'm sorry, but we simply can't afford $4.5 trillion on an annual basis for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Well, nobody's going to do that. We already know that the annual payment for servicing the debt right now is roughly $1 trillion, a little bit short of $1 trillion, or equal to the cost of our defense in this country. So initially, people say, oh well, let's go to defense. We'll cut that. Well, that's not going to get you very far. You have to tackle the $4.5 trillion. Nobody wants to do it. So, I predict that we'll do what happened in Sri Lanka. We'll all go over the cliff because no one wants to cut anything. Now, once that happens, I think you'll see Washington simply standing around with nothing to do and no one to talk to, and that's when you're going to see a kind of economic, financial, societal implosion. What happens at that point is anybody's guess, but I can tell you one thing. If I were an American looking into the future through the sort of looking glass and I saw this coming, the first thing I would say is whoever we put in charge, they can't come from within the Beltway. Anybody who's there now needs to go away. So, that's number one. And rule number two is, don't bring anybody in from the Ivy League schools or the service academies. Those are the people that brought us to this point. That leaves plenty of Americans, but that's not something anybody inside the Beltway wants to hear, and that's not something people inside the Beltway are going to do. You know, it's really sad that there does seem to be no appetite for making the long-term decisions, and we just think about the short term, the next election, spending our way into the next budget crisis, and a lot of people feel like they're not represented anymore. The distrust that the American public feels in Congress and politics in general is, I think, at an all-time low. And I think you take a lot of risk sticking your neck out there because you share thoughts that no doubt rile some of the powerful interests, and they have a history of silencing their critics. So, why do you do that? Well, our country, our choice, which is something I joined. I did not found it. Others founded it and asked me to come in as CEO. The reason I did is that these people that founded it, who are initial investors to help build this organization, said something that resonated strongly with me. They said, you know, we vote Republican, we vote Democrat, we vote Republican, we vote Democrat. It doesn't make any difference. The outcome in Washington is the same. Disaster after disaster after disaster. They also concluded, and I agree with them, that there are plenty of people, Democrats and Republicans, that really adhere to what I would call traditional conservative values and view themselves as first and foremost Americans. And this is very important because one of the things that we've witnessed in this country is the weakening of our citizenship, the notion of citizenship, the obligations of citizenship, and that is bound up with our identity as Americans. So, this is an organization that rose from those origins and said, first of all, we want a true American first policy at home and abroad, which means we want prosperity at home and we want peace abroad. We want to withdraw our forces from all of these pointless locations, stop getting our soldiers killed and wounded for nothing, stop wasting money trying to transform the world into some sort of facsimile of us. Instead, let's look at the rest of the world from the standpoint of mutual respect. If we want people to respect us, we have to respect people who are different from us, who govern themselves differently from us, who have a different culture from us. There's nothing wrong with that. It may not be exactly as we are, but then again, we know that we are imperfect. We've strayed quite a bit from where we began, and we have to get back on track. We can't get back on track as long as we're entangled in these alliances overseas, and these alliances are not protecting us. They're dragging us into wars that we don't need to fight. Well, I think you're touching on something a lot of Americans feel, that we've really stuck our noses into everyone's business around the world. Everyone sees us as a bully, and going back to what we mentioned earlier, a foreign empire abroad is not compatible with a strong democracy here and a strong economy, and we've lost a lot of that. We should be an example as opposed to forcing our way upon everyone else, be that economic strength and prosperity for others to look at and want to emulate themselves, and let them make that choice. So, as we start to wrap up, Colonel, it's just such a pleasure to have you on because you really are a voice of reason in this very confusing and tumultuous time. Is there anything that you haven't been asked in all of these interviews that you do that you really think should be discussed? I think it might be useful at this point for everyone to understand something. I, like most Americans, would like to see Israel survive. We believe Israel has a right to exist and it should exist. We're worried that what the Israelis are doing right now is putting themselves at risk unnecessarily. That by these extreme measures in Gaza, they are essentially forcing cohesion on multiplying enemies beyond their borders. And that's very dangerous. Because, as you pointed out at the beginning, we are weaker today than we were 30 years ago. We have serious issues here at home, but our armed forces are a shadow of their former selves. And we are not organized or equipped or trained, frankly, to fight differently. What we've seen in Ukraine is a paradigm shift in warfare. We haven't come to terms with that, and we're not going to come to terms with it quickly. So, the right answer is we need to withdraw, to retire backward, in other words, retrench. Because we are not prepared right now for a major war in either Europe or the Middle East. We ought to be finding a road to peace as quickly and as expeditiously as possible because we're really not prepared to fight. You can't make commitments to do a whole variety of things when the means to meet those commitments don't exist. Right now, those means are no longer available. We have serious problems here at home. That doesn't mean abandoning Israel or anybody else. But it means impressing on them the criticality of finding a third way forward. Get out of this either or, either we win or they win, and there's nothing in between. If we can do that, then I think there's hope, but I'm not sure we can. I wish I could sit here and say these two irreconcilable sides can find a way forward. I don't know. Right. Well, in the military, especially in war when the stakes are highest, you have to put aside emotions, and it seems like that's the one thing that we can't do, and social media provides us with the perfect place to vent them and for misinformation to spread. Certainly down the line, more and more AIs. It's like you can doubt everything that you see and you don't know what the truth is. But on the emotional side, what is your advice for people to take that away and just make a sound decision? Because this is where I think people are getting really mixed up. Well, we use the word democracy, but in reality, we are a republic. People vote for people to represent their interests. Now, we know that the people we voted into office, in most cases, have not represented our interests. If I were to poll, say, 5,000 Americans randomly into a stadium and ask them, do you want to go to war here? Do you want to go to war there or somewhere else? I think they would overwhelmingly say no. We can look at the polling data over the 20th century. In virtually every case, Americans were opposed to overseas entanglements and war. So, that's not really the issue. The issue is, how do we get control of our government? How do we get people in Washington who represent our interests? And one of the things that you have to do if you're going to represent other people's interests is set aside your own emotion. Control it. You know, I remember sitting in a meeting with several 4-stars, British, German, and American. And this particular officer stood up and gave this very passionate speech about what he thought was appropriate, and the British 4-star said, "Control yourself. We're not interested in emotion. We want facts. That's what we need. We need facts, less emotion. And instead of condemning one side or the other, if we can get the facts, then there's a chance that we can find this middle road, at least temporarily. Once you get people to stop killing each other, at least for a while, things can improve. It's not a perfect outcome, but until you stop killing each other, it's hopeless."